Hey everybody, welcome to what's probably going to result in a video series about resin versus filament printing. I have the Photon Mono X here, and I also have the Vyper over here. And if anyone is considering the two machines, there's a lot to think about. So at first I was going to make a single video, but I think this is probably going to result in a few. And I'll try to break them down by topic and subject matter so that you can jump to the chunk that's most interesting, but also that if someone doesn't have either and is looking to get into 3D printing at all, what the considerations are. So to rewind this all the way back and considering someone that may have no experience printing at all, let's talk a little bit about the machines. The first thing you need is a machine, but it's not just buying a machine, right? There's a lot, experienced people will tell you, there's a lot that goes into the other things that you'll need. So let's talk about those other things, what they are and why, and then in either later in this video or in another video, depending on how long it turns out to be, we'll talk about some of the other things. So this is the Photon Mono X. It's a resin-based printer, and what you'll need, obviously, besides the printer, is a space to have the printer, but you'll also need a couple of other things. The resin itself is a UV-sensitive resin, which needs UV light to cure it, of course. So how this printer works is this platform moves up and down. Your printer is underneath it. There's no sense in showing it here. You put the resin in here. This platform moves up and down, and your prints on the bottom of this surface, and it raises up, and this vat contains liquid. Okay, I know we're getting basic here, but these are important things to understand. And so in here is a liquid. Okay. And because there's a liquid sitting in here, you have to consider certain things like spillage, drips, mess, and what this liquid is made out of, which is a photosensitive material. Okay, so this machine is using UV light to harden the material in different shapes, in slices, as it moves up, and off you go. You have yourself a print. That, unfortunately, for the resin printer is not the end. Now, because it's using light to shape the curing layers, the advantage is pretty great. What you get is a very high detail piece. It's pretty awesome. The downside, though, is that you have liquid, and it's even when it's curing the piece, of course, the platform keeps moving up and down. It raises a bit, it releases, it lowers back down just enough. It leaves a gap, like, 0.1 millimeter, and there's just enough resin there. It flashes some light, it freezes the resin, and then it lifts up and moves back down to another millimeter. The shape of the light changes, or the shadows and the light spots change, it flashes. So because of that technology, you end up with a very high quality part. It is, however, made out of resin. And so therein lies one of the downsides, is it's resin. So because it keeps going up and down in this vat of liquid, the entire part, even though it has been cured with UV light, the entire part is soaked in this resin material. It's covered in the resin material. So when you pull this off, flip it over, take your part off of the build plate, which is up here, what you end up having to do is, of course, stop it from dripping. You need to bring it into another bin, which I have sort of under here. You bring it into another sort of bin. You need, typically, and it's resin dependent, but for the most part, you need a strong isopropyl alcohol base. Typically 90-something% is recommended. I've seen people clean with 70-something%, which is a little easier, less expensive to get. However, I've been using 90, I don't know what it was, 95 or whatever it is, so you've got to clean the part with 95% alcohol. Now, you can't just put your hands all in this resin either. You have to use gloves. So you need the printer, you need resin, you need gloves, you need a place to potentially make a mess, and it's bound to drip somewhere. And you also need a place to clean this off. Now, once you've cleaned everything into your other bin, potentially, what you have is all the residue, right? So now you've got to have a means to clean all that, wipe that down, UV cure that. A lot of times, people commonly will cure their resin in sunlight just because it's easier. I happen to have over here a UV curing cabinet. Right, so you probably need some sort of UV curing cabinet that has LEDs in it. They have other ones you can purchase. I made this myself because it's fun and I'm a DIY kind of person. But so I've got this UV curing cabinet. I've got tongs to touch the parts. I've got gloves. I've got alcohol sprays. I've got UV flashlights. I've got I have spare film for the vat, which is this piece here. This piece is called the vat. This is where the resin sits. And yes, I have spare film here. This can tear or have issues, so I have spare ones of those. I have masks, gloves, cleaning supplies. There's all my, you can't even see it, it's too dark down there, but there's alcohol down there. Paper towels. You're going to create, I've got goggles, because you're going to need to wear goggles. And so all of this, you print your part. There's another thing. You print your part. But this, depending on which resin you use, there's fumes. I've got a space here that's a basement, so it's not too bad. I use a pretty low odor resin. I'm using the Elegoo Standard Gray, which is, it's a very inexpensive, but I find it to be, heck, I find the odor to be pleasant, actually. But in any event, it's a low odor resin, so I don't really have this venting outside. I do have a small window in the cellar that I sometimes just open up, just to let some of the air out. The other thing you need when we're talking about environment is resin is, because it's a liquid-ish, it is also has a viscosity to it. Viscosity meaning like motor oil, like a weight, right? So the cooler it is, the slower it moves. The warmer it is, the more easily the fluid moves, right? There's some real basic sort of fluid dynamics. And you need an ambient temperature in the room that is conducive to that. So it's not just for an optimal print. I mean, if it's, if you're trying to print in a really cold garage with the door open because the resin is smelly and it's, freezing temperatures outside, you are probably not going to get the greatest quality print. So, within reason, but still, not everybody's area is different. You are not likely to be able to take a resin printer and set it up in a spare bedroom unless you create some sort of way to vent the fumes out. It does even fill this basement with fumes. So, and that's, like I said, considered to be a pretty low odor resin that I'm using. I don't even know about some of the harder, or Ceratec, or some of the other resins that are available. There are water washable, more eco-friendly types of resins. Those are typically a little more expensive, and I don't have any personal experience with them, but unless you only use that type of resin, that's going to be sort of a limiting factor to your workflow. Okay, so we talked about the printer, of course, you need. and all the things you need just to make a successful print. You need a place with some proper ventilation. You need temperature within some reason, right? It can't not be too cold. I typically run a heater. I try to warm up the bottle of resin itself. You can see my heater under here. I have two different heaters, actually. I try to get a small space heater running while I'm printing, just to keep the room, and it's not too bad down here. You can see I also have a thermometer. It's 71 here now, only because it's like, 80-something degrees outside. But in the spring and sort of winter months, it does get a little cooler down here. It does get into like, high 50s, and I use a heater to warm up the bottle of resin, put the resin in here. I also keep a heater just promoting ambient temperature so that the viscosity of the resin stays pretty fluid. And that's just because this thing is sort of moving up and down, pretty quickly. Okay, so that's a lot. I covered a lot. I'll try to put some of this info in the details too, so that you have some idea of where I'm going with some of this. But there's a lot to consider, right, when you're getting into this. So it's not just buy the machine and print and it's a little bit of a mess, which is what I thought. It is. And you'll get used to it, and I did. I had a nice workflow. I had a space. I have all these benches. I can clean this up. I've got a nice rubber mat here that I can make a mess on. I've got my goggles and gloves, and all my stuff is sort of prepared to go. I've got my curing, and you can certainly get a good workflow going and get some pretty good quality prints. Okay, so that is space, material, time, and post cleanup. Now, that's all from when you start the print. What happens before the print? Also very interesting. There's a software that you'll need to create the file that you put here. There's a decent free options for both of these printers, actually. And so I use, for this, I use Lychee, and for this I use Cura. Those pieces of software are pretty popular. I have whole separate videos on Lychee, but I guess I should put some Cura videos out, but I don't. I've been doing some advanced things with Cura, but I think it's not information that you couldn't find anywhere else. So I like to put interesting, unique, sort of well thought out stuff out there. There are sure to be better Cura videos than I would make myself currently. We'll see as I learn it a bit more. But in any event, you take your file, you get it from wherever, Thingiverse, or wherever you happen to purchase it, or download it from if it's free, and slice it on the software. You typically need to support a model. Now, you can print flat to this base here, but of course you end up with a flat edge. And that's really one of the strengths of resin printing, is you can, and if you're interested in supports, I have other support videos you can look at about Lychee, but you could print effectively something tall, support it, and you want to put all your pointy bits towards the vat, and you will get a really high quality, high detail. You want all your details kind of facing toward the vat as you're printing, and the finer details. I've printed some pretty complex things. When I first got this, I was really hell-bent on printing like the most complicated things so that I could learn the machine and how to make that happen, and I ended up with some pretty awesome prints. But so you really can get some really high quality print. However, now here's something else interesting. Let's see. I have some parts here. I have a lot of interesting, weird things that I've printed out over time. Here's something. So let's see. Here's just a chunk. This is what something looks like. So this is resin printing. This is left over from my torture test. So you can see what the inside looks like when it is hollowed out but has supports on the inside. But the material is somewhere between, try to imagine something that's like ceramic and plastic combined is how I would describe what this is. It does not have any flexibility whatsoever. It really functions mostly like almost like a ceramic, almost stone-like quality to it, where it will be extremely strong until it just chips and smashes away. It doesn't really flex at all. There's very little, I would say, minimal flex to it. Now, they have more flexible resins, and you can combine a little bit of flex to make your part either a little more flexible or a little more rigid, depending. So let me see. Let's see if I can give you an example. Here's a piece that's pretty thin. You can see that's a really thin little skeleton leg, and I'm sort of putting there's a little flex to it, but not, oh, broke it. Well, that'll show you just how not flexible that is. You can't put a lot of pressure on resin, unless you're either blending or using a intentionally flexible resin, and those have their own pros and cons, and as you experiment, you'll learn that. So, okay, I think that'll give you a pretty good high-level view. As you can see, I've got tons of rags. I've got, just things to clean up, things to dispose. I've got lots of gloves and different things. So there is more than you would think at the onset as far as kind of mess and cleanup. And it's not really, now why? You say, well, the heck with it. I'll just scrape the thing off the plate and stick it in some UV light and I'm good to go. Nah, that isn't going to work, and here's why. If your part isn't thoroughly rinsed, what you're going to have is the piece with its nice high detail, which is cured, which has then been dunked in uncured resin. So if you don't clean all that uncured resin off of the part, what you're going to do is either wash out some of your details. You're going to have weird shiny spots. You really need to thoroughly wash, sometimes scrub, rinse. There are whole sort of videos on workflows of how to properly clean some of these things. You really need to clean the part thoroughly, especially if it's hollow. That's why this thing was a fail. It was hollow, but I wasn't able to rinse all the resin out, and I didn't create decent holes in the bottom of it, and I couldn't drain it. Here's another cool piece. You can see that this was a really big base I was making, and you can see sort of the size of the drain holes I put in the bottom of this thing, and I had, I think, 5 of these big drain holes. Even then, with 5 big drain holes, I'm almost inclined, on a part like this, I'm almost inclined to just make most of the bottom open like this. If it's something like a base, you could really make the majority of the bottom of the part just wide open like this. Drain holes are a real interesting angle to all this. If you want to print something that's hollow like that with a mesh, you've got to hollow it out, but then you've also got to rinse from this really fine mesh here. You've got to try to rinse out all this resin, dunk it, submerge it, swish it around. They have whole chambers to kind of vibrate the part to loosen up all this. Drain it, dry it really well, and then cure it in something like this. So, okay, that's the whole workflow, but it's important, right? If you don't have a space for all that, and a space that you can get kind of dirty, this is why my printer is here in the cellar. Okay, moving on. That's the sort of environmental pieces you'll need. Now, the workflow for something like a filament printer is a little different. You do need to keep this is PLA, and herein lies an interesting difference. So right away is a difference. I can touch the raw material with my hands. That's already something that you can't do really with resin printing. Not that you really need to, but I don't need gloves to work on this at all. So there's one difference, right? The other difference is, of course, the print material is on a spool like this. I made this myself just because I didn't like the one that came with the Vyper. But you'll need something to hold the spool. Typically, the printer will have a little arm or something. I thought the one that came with the Vyper was just a little too, I don't know what, a little too, I don't know. I don't want to say flimsy, but it just didn't seem to control the resin, control the filament quite something a little more stable like this. So it moved around a lot. It moves around on this a lot here too. But in any event, how do you take care of this material? It really should be in a low moisture environment. Now, lo and behold, I'm in the basement, and so there is some humidity where I live, and certainly in this cellar. So what do? When I'm not printing, I pull this off, and I put it in a bag that goes all the way to here, just like a Ziploc bag type of thing, with some of these guys, these typical silica gel desiccant types of bags. These are, I think it's $10 for this whole bag on Amazon. So, and then the other ones, you can store them in Tupperware with something like that. That'll keep this nice and dry. So that's one aspect to the material that's different, and that's PLA. Now let's talk about material. Not only can you print with PLA or PLA Plus, which is a semi-rigid plastic. You can also print in ABS, which is commonly used in like automotive and some other things. You can print in TPU. At least this printer can, and most printers of this type. This is really just like an Ender 3 Pro clone with a couple of built-in upgrades, or some people say it's like a Creality CR6, I think. But in any event, this has got some of the built-in bells and whistles you want. I have a different video of why I picked this printer, so you can check that out. But in any event, this particular printer and many printers of this type can print in a variety of materials. So I have not just PLA. You can print with like a faux wood. It's like a sort of plastic wood, kind of like something you'd see like for decking kind of material. And like I said, TPU is also flexible. That is almost everything you would need for bare bones printing. Now, I'm not saying that's finishing, but that's bare bones printing. It's really just grab your file. Like I said, I use Cura. Put it into the printer. Come over here. It needs to warm up, which takes on this machine about 2 minutes. It warms the bed. It warms the hot end here, which melts this material. So this material gets fed in through some motors back here. It comes in, comes around. There's a hot end in here. There's some fans to cool the hot end and just keep everything kind of flowing. The nozzle's down here. And it just moves back and forth and prints. The bed moves like this. And you end up with this piece. Now, when this thing's done, it goes zip, the bed moves forward, and then this plate cools down. This is a magnetic plate, but at some point, you're able to just pull this part off, and that's it. You can pull it off with your bare hands and start touching it, and this has a much more plastic, like what you would expect from plastic, plasticky type feel to it. It's pretty, you can see it's pretty bendy, and that lends itself to some different use cases. So, workflow-wise on this, I would say it's quite a bit shorter. You don't need as much to, at least I'm talking from just get the part off the build plate and be able to touch it types of things, which is really like I was saying with this, just to be able to handle the part. I'm not talking about finishing work or anything else. Just to get the part to a point where you can handle it, you've got to get it off of this, clean it, wash it, deal with however you washed it in a responsible way, and dispose of all that, and cure it in some type of UV light, which of course doesn't come with the printer, it's extra, and then you can handle your part like this, right? Like I'm handling my pieces here. Okay. This, on the other hand, you print, cool it off, pull it off, and you can touch it right away. So that's an advantage. Temperature-wise, I still think you should keep the temperature reasonable down here. These materials, I don't think you could print this in a freezing temperature either. But because this is a heated bed, heated nozzle, it doesn't seem to be as critical to make sure this is a well-maintained environment as far as temperature goes. I don't feel the need to do that. I feel like even in the winter down here, it gets to be about probably like I said, in the 50s, maybe high 40s. It's not too bad because this is self-heated and self-heated. I can try it, but I don't expect to have a dramatic problem. Because this prints from the bottom up, from the bottom of your part up, of course you have to orient your part differently. It does provide a couple of advantages, but also disadvantages. If your part doesn't have a natural, nice, flat area to print, you're going to have to use supports. Now, supports with filament-based is a little more interesting, I would say. While I think you'll see a lot of people in resin forums and things discussing supports and support issues and how to support and all of that, supports are, I would say, at least as tricky with this. Maybe a little less so, because you don't have to deal with, you're not fighting against gravity, right? Your part is sitting on here, it's printing, and building upwards. With this style of printer, of course, you also have gravity and physics a little more to contend with, because this whole plate, the entire weight of your model is moving up and down as it's being built, so the piece is just getting heavier, larger as it's being built, depending on what you're doing, like something like this. I ran out of resin, cut the power, and I had to leave it like that. And so I said, well, this will at least be interesting for knowledge sharing. So this does also, because it prints with hot filament and this head is moving around, what do you have for cleanup? You might have, I don't know if I can find it actually. Ha! I do. You may, if you have some kind of problem, print something that ends up looking like this. And you have these little sort of stringy plastic pieces. This was something that the supports that I tried to do didn't quite work out, and so I just ended up with this, I don't know what you call it, bird's nest of filament here. So you may also, from time to time, and when you're finished with the print, you usually have like whatever the shape that you're printing. It always draws like sort of an outline of around the parts. But this is not too bad. This you can dispose of that, and you'll have these little, sometimes some small stringing pieces. People will sometimes throw a lighter on some of that if it's, let's say if you're printing something and it has a little bit of stringing in it. I've got some tiny, but you probably can't even see that. There's a tiny amount of stringing in there. But if there's some stringing, you probably can't see it. If there is some stringing and some little wispy plastic pieces, You can just hit it with a little, some people use a lighter. I don't know if I would do that. If you have a hair dryer, that would probably take care of it. Or I have a heat gun. A heat gun will really melt PLA pretty quickly, and so you'll not want to put the heat on there very long. But in any event, from raw material to I can just grab my part. You don't need anything, actually. You just take the raw material, it prints, it cools off, and you can handle it immediately. So there's not a lot of post-processing involved. I guess there's no post-processing involved, really. You pull the part off of here, and you have your part. If then you just kind of give this a little cleanup. Like I said, there's usually something like this will be on your base, and your part, whatever your parts are around, you sort of scrape this off, and pull this off, and off you go. You've got your part. So, and then what? Then the machine cools down. So there is a cool down and heat up time on this machine. It's all built in. And like I said, for this, it's only about a couple minutes in both directions. A couple minutes to heat up, a couple minutes to cool down. Raw material, keep it dry. Like I said, maybe some, you could just throw this in some Tupperware, or Tupperware with some of those silica gel to draw some of the moisture out is what I choose to do. This is relatively inexpensive, but I've had good luck with it. This is just Geetech PLA, like I said, and it just needs to roll smoothly, and you got your part. So I would say, with regard to post-processing, the nod goes to Filament. It's especially great when you just want to pull this thing off and you can have at it. Now, detail-wise, that's a different story. We can talk about some of that after. I'm going to get into, in another video, what you can and cannot print between these two printers. And I think that will also be a difference. So, a lot of people ask me, hey, what kind of computer do I need? And I always say, what do you want to do with it is the question. And so what do you want to do with it is relevant for printers as well. But I'll get into that in another video. Right now I'm really covering logistics. Maybe that's what I'll call this video. This is the real nuts and bolts of not just buying the printer. So this printer is relatively quiet. I would say it's no more noisy than if you have a older desktop computer. The loudest component in this is just a fan. This does have the updated stepper motor drivers, and that makes the movement of that pretty quiet. But the power supply fan is a little noisy. So could you run this in a spare bedroom? Yes. There is environmentally not a lot of smell. I don't think there's any smell. Heck, there's no smell at all to the filament itself. And as it's printing, it might have a little bit of a plasticky smell because you are dealing with melted plastic, I guess. But it certainly hasn't filled this whole basement with fumes in the way a resin printing is. I think you probably could reasonably get away with this in a spare bedroom. Something like spare bedroom, and just close the door if there was some kind of plasticky fume smell to it. But certainly nothing near in the way. Even this thing's clean and empty, and the machine still has a smell to it. So fume-wise, environmental, and even just sort of space-wise, I think this is the filament printers will get the nod, because you really just need enough room for, well, what you see here. It does its thing. It zips back and forth. It moves up and down. You get your part. And post-processing is really up to you as far as kind of cleaning the part up and painting and whatever you want. But I don't think you really need you could do this at your kitchen table if you really wanted to. You don't need a sort of dedicated space that's able to handle sort of more toxic chemicals and things. Whereas this, you need you know, a space where you can sort of handle these things in such a way, with gloves and clean up and things. Okay. I hope I've made that pretty clear, because it is the primary and most dramatic difference between the two machine types. Another element you'll need to consider with resin printing, because it is UV sensitive, of course, you can't be in a very bright space. You'll either need to have some sort of container, housing over this, or like I am, I'm in the cellar. There's one tiny window over here next to Scully Bones, and it really doesn't let a whole lot of light in. So, you know, ambient light is also a factor, especially, or I guess only ambient sunlight. If you've got your vat sitting here with a bunch of resin in it, and you want to leave it for a day or two, you'll have to, this of course is intended to block some UV, but I typically cover this with a, this is actually an old t-shirt. I just cover this with cloth to block out any sunlight, because and I'm already in the cellar. You certainly can't really set this up in a bright space, or that will also affect, potentially cure this in an anomalous way where you're going to get something weird, and so you don't want that. So sunlight's also a factor. Not so much with, not at all really. I'm pretty sure you could print this in broad daylight and it's not going to have any problem. So that's yet another factor as far as a difference between the two machines. I guess I'm going to end this here before this gets too long, because I want to get this out there. In my next video, I'm going to talk about what you can and cannot print with what I'm going to use is the most basic of materials. So we'll get into that. This has already been a pretty long video, and I don't want people to, you know, fall asleep on this. So tools-wise, you know, this snips and maybe a scraper. I haven't had to use a scraper really at all. A nice pair of tweezers, though, to pull some of the material off of the hot end here is really all you need. Anycubic gives you all of that in this drawer here. Environmentally, cleanup wise, other things you need to buy in addition to the printer, I would say this filament printing, hands down, all you need is some filament and a printer, and you can successfully print. You will have a part in your hand that you can use. Over here, all you need is a machine, resin. Environmentally, you need a place that can handle those kinds of fumes. Temperature-wise, does make a, I think, more important difference with resin than it does with filament printing. This is a little more sensitive potentially to moisture than this would be. Obviously, this is liquid, so it's probably not quite as sensitive to moisture. However, post-processing wise, there is a whole lot of time dealing with the part once you get it off of here. Not necessarily time, it's just mess. It doesn't take a long time. You just unscrew this, you take your part, clean it, cure it, and off you go. But there is that additional step, and it is not, it's not nothing. And then you have to deal with all the chemicals and things on top of it. So I hope that helps explain at least some of the differences between the two machines, and what you would need between the two machine types. And like I said, I'm going to get into in my next video as far as what you can and cannot print between the two. And I think that is going to be a very interesting difference. So, hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you for watching.